Hey, welcome to the People's Carpenter. I'm Glenn Peoples, and today I haven't had many unboxings, so this isn't saying much, but this is the most exciting unboxing that I've done. It's a big box from Makita. In breaking news, I have merchandise, t-shirts. By all means, feel free to buy a t-shirt to support this channel. They don't give me very much, but every little bit helps. I have set up 2 stores and I'm linking to those in the description below. And the reason I've done that is because, well, not everyone lives in the same place. So I've got a store at Digitease, which is a New Zealand based website. I'll leave a link to that. If you're in this part of the world, that might be the quickest way to get one. And I also have a store at Spreadshirt. Is it Spreadshirt or Spreadshirts? I think it's Spreadshirt. I'll leave a link to that as well. That's based in the United States, so whatever works best for you, feel free to go and buy a truckload of this stuff and be super cool. Hi there. So, like I said, it's a big box from Makita. I wasn't pressured into this by all the cool kids, although lots of the cool kids are using these, and I can kind of see why they're pretty handy. In my workshop at the moment, maybe always, but at the moment anyway, I don't have a table saw. I often think that I would like one, and maybe I'll organize things slightly differently and get one in the future. But something that can do some of the functions of a table saw. Well, number one is a miter saw, which I already have, but also now I'm going to say track saw. What I've noticed, and I don't really know why, is that all American woodworkers call these track saws, but at New Zealand retail outlet websites, they're all called rail saws. Now obviously they're the same thing. I don't know why that difference exists, but it just seems to exist. Now, can I pass the idiot test? Which way does this box open? There we go. So I've got the 36 volt Makita plunge cut rail saw, brushless. Right. Nice set of instructions. Won't be looking at those just now, maybe never. That's all that's in the box. But when I bought this, it wasn't a total kit. You know, sometimes you get a kit that includes batteries and all sorts of attachments and whatnot. This one just included the saw and a 1.5 meter rail, which is fine. I went ahead and bought some clamps. The Makita clamps themselves are somewhat expensive, so I got some Tool Shed branded clamps. I got all of this from the Tool Shed, where I often go. And I bought an additional 1.4 meter rail and some rail connectors. Again, the Makita ones themselves are somewhat expensive. The Tool Shed tracks, rails, are compatible with the Makita ones, and so are the joiners. So I've got a set of joiners to connect those two things. It's a 36 volt saw. Now, as you know, you can get the 40 volt saw. This is a 36 volt, which operates using 2 18 volt batteries. I already have a few batteries, so I didn't buy those. I may decide that it's easier with more batteries and buy those in future. Why didn't I get the 40 volt? I mean, the 40 volt, I've seen reviews of the 40 volt and it looks good, maybe even just as good as the 36 volt. The simple reason that I got this one is that I'm already using the 18 volt battery system, you know, with the batteries and the chargers, and so it's easier just to buy this because it fits into that system that I've already got going on. Now, I'm not going to presume to do a complete review right now, look at all the features of it and form an opinion. I learned my lesson when I did that not long ago with a pocket hole jig, where I initially liked it, but then after using it for a little while decided that I didn't like it. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to discover the features as I go. I've got a couple of uses for this lined up, and they'll be included in this video. Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to do with it is cut some plywood flooring for the garden shed out there. So that's what you'll see me doing with it next. So here's the piece of plywood. Actually, there are 2 of them stacked on top of each other. that I'm going to cut. I've heard somewhere that the best way to cut plywood is actually lying on the ground on a thick surface that you can cut into rather than like this, and that's probably true, but nonetheless this is the way I've decided to do it. The first thing I've noticed, and I've heard this but of course I haven't experienced it for myself until now, is that these rubber mats or rubber strips on the underside of the rail are really effective when it comes to being non-slip. I'm tugging on that pretty hard and it's not going to move, so I'm not going to clamp this on. I imagine there may be times when I'll want to do that, but I'm not going to do it here. I'm just going to line up this rubber strip on the end with the line that I want to cut. I'm actually going to allow very slightly more, and I'll show you why. I'm going to line up this rubber strip on the marks that I want to cut, but on each end I'll put them slightly, ever so slightly, over the line. And that's because this whole rubber strip, not all of it will remain once I've done the cut. The first cut will trim off a tiny bit from the edge of this rubber strip, and the advantage of doing that is that from now on I will be able to see exactly the line on which the blade will cut. Yep, and that's why I'm only going to use this track and the other one for cutting at a 90-degree angle. The saw is capable of doing bevel cuts, and I'll look at that function a bit later. But of course, if you use it to do a bevel cut, you're turning the blade that way, and you're going to cut off a little bit more of this rubber. So the edge where the blade will cut will be at a slightly different position, which is fine, but it does mean that you can't use the same track for both functions. You won't get an accurate gauge of where the blade will cut. That's the first thing I notice. The blade stops spinning really quickly when I release the trigger. That's a good break. I have a smaller, much less expensive Makita saw, and it doesn't have that feature, so that's nice. I know why it didn't cut all the way through, and I'll show you in a moment. Excuse me while I cross sides. Now this is going to fall off, that's okay. Yeah. Nothing wrong with the saw, but as this thing twists to fall off, it's grabbing the blade. I'm just going to move this piece of wood over here to support the blade a bit better. Just like that. I continued the cut all the way to the end just to cut off this little rubber strip in the way that I described earlier. Good. Man, that was so easy. So easy. Obviously part of that is because it's a new blade, and a new blade always cuts well, or pretty well. Don't know how well you can see that, but it feels like a very, very smooth cut. It was really easy to push through the wood, minimal effort required. Okay, so first impression is great. let's head back to the workshop and I'll talk about some of the features that I was observing as I did that, because I quite like them. So we are back in the workshop, but it is some time later now. I've used this saw for a couple of other purposes, which I guess helps me to form an assessment of it. You'll see one of those next. That'll be the last clip in this video. What do I think? Great. You know, you saw the result on that plywood. It did bind up a little bit because of the way that I let the sheet drop. I shouldn't have done that, really. There are better ways to cut plywood. But speaking of binding, I do notice that, you see, the blade comes out, but nothing else comes out. There's no riving knife. Now, I know that not every plunge cut saw has a riving knife, but some of the nicer ones do. Even some of the ones that aren't so nice do. Is it rigid or Wen? I forget, but at least one of them, maybe both. Those are American brands. We don't have those here anyway, but at least one of those has a riving knife. You would think that a high-end machine like Makita might have one. But that's the thing, just be aware of that. Some of the features I picked up on, though, you'll notice when I originally went to do my first cut, I couldn't plunge it all the way. It was just cutting a very shallow line along the surface, and I thought, what's going on here? Well, that's a feature. But there is a little knob up here. You push it in to engage that feature, and you pull it back out to stop engaging that feature. That creates a score along the surface, and that's handy if you're cutting plywood, because if you go cutting at full depth right from the get-go all the way through, you can get a bit of a breakout, a bit of tear out at the top of the sheet, and having a score line there prevents that from happening. Maybe I should have used that feature all the way across, but I just didn't. It didn't really matter so much for that project. What else did I see? Oh yeah, so there's a little clip on the side here that I discovered, and you stick it out and a little piece of metal juts out the side, and the reason for that is when you jut that little piece of metal out, it stops the saw from rocking on the track, whereas if you tip it like that without the thing jutted out, it will rock off. Of course, that's relevant mostly because when you do bevel cuts, the saw tips that way, and this will stop the saw from tipping off the rail, which is important. You can see sawdust all over the saw. You might think, oh, you could have cleaned the saw before this, but no, I want you to see that I've been using it. So the angle of the bevel, that's pretty easy to set here. I haven't done, and I don't really foresee myself doing much in terms of bevel cutting. Oh, I see. How do you set the bevel? How do you set the bevel? That's not setting the bevel, that just shows you. I guess what you do, yeah, you don't set the bevel in advance. You tip the whole saw. Yeah, okay. Tip the whole saw until that orange meter points to the angle that you want. Now, I'll notice initially I might think, oh gosh, it's only going to 22.5, although I wouldn't be able to count the 22.5. That's because there is a knob here where you can set the positive stop to make sure it stops at 22.5. Otherwise, it goes all the way to 45. And then there is a little knob, not really a knob, a little switch in here that you can activate to enable it to go all the way to 48. Why would you want 48? I'm not sure, maybe some of you know. But apparently some people want that, and that's fine, they've got that. Easy to adjust. It's got like big numbers which show you. Do I actually like the method of doing it this way? I guess that's a personal preference thing, but it seems to work fine. And then you've got, what does that do? Some of you are going to know. Oh, I see. Oh, no, I don't see. I guess that allows some kind of, I don't know. What is that little feature there? It doesn't look like something that I would want to use. Oh, okay, so I guess, no, what we're saying is, well, that just shows, that little round thing there contains the numbers from 1 to 8. But why does it contain those there? Why would you want to do anything different there? Not sure. Not sure. It doesn't look like it changes anything. Maybe it does. If so, maybe you can tell me in the comments, but it doesn't look like something I would use. What I'm trying to figure out is if there is a way to make the blade stop right there. While you're changing it out. But I can't see a method for doing that. I mean, there doesn't need to be one. You just hold it there while you're undoing it. Right, so it's got a battery indicator here. Okay, I've used one of mine all the way down to just 1 bar. I've used one of them down to 2 bars. I don't know what I was doing before I put them in here. Will it operate with just 1 battery? I mean, in principle, it should be able to, but it might not. No. I believe there are some saws that can do that, like the Festool, but not with this one. You've got to have both batteries in. That brake, man, I love that brake. It brakes so hard and so quickly. Right, I'm going to show you now me using this to cut through something a lot more demanding than plywood. I'm building a laminated slab coffee table made from long pieces of cedar, which is quite a soft wood, and limu, which is quite a hard wood. It's mostly cedar, so it should be pretty easy to cut through, but it's also laminated up, which makes something inherently strong. And will it provide a challenge? Probably not, but I'm just trying the saw out. One thing I'm not wild about, although it's not a fault, is, and I'll show you, okay, notice the way I have to hold this saw. I'm right-handed, so it would be most natural for me to hold the saw like that and push it forward. But because the blade is on the right-hand side, really it's most natural and only, well, no, it would be possible to do that, but quite weird. This way I can watch it while I cut, which means that I have to do it lefty, which doesn't come naturally to me, but it is on the rail, of course, so that means I shouldn't lose control of the thing. This slab is 52 millimeters thick, and according to the spec sheet, the maximum plunge depth of this saw is 56 millimeters. So we should be fine. Now, okay, I've got some smoke coming up here. I guess that's because this blade is spinning quickly against this end grain. Yeah, I can smell that. And it's burning the rubber as well. Okay, so now, I wasn't going that slow. I felt like I had to go fairly slow because of how much work was being done there, but that's quite a burn. That's quite a burn. Now, what would cause that? Going unnecessarily slow, I suppose, could cause that, but I really don't think I was doing that. Okay, the rubber's not melting, so that's good. But I was expecting it to be slightly easier. I can see that I need to cut slightly further back as well, so I'll just move this a little. Was the blade being deflected out a little, perhaps? I don't know. Let's try that again. Yeah, I think the blade is actually being deflected slightly out because it's being pushed into an edge, and that edge is just pushing because the way that I set this up means that the blade should just be cutting through there, not being pushed out, but I think it is. I mean, everyone likes to say it's not a technique problem, but I really don't think I'm doing anything that I shouldn't do. Yeah, that blade is absolutely being deflected. Absolutely being deflected. Because I'll show you, you can see the line along which the blade should be cutting, but the blade is being deflected out to that point, and it is rubbing against that edge and burning. Now there must be a way. Okay. This could be the source of my troubles. Maybe I should have read the instructions. This is rattling slightly on the track. And now it's not. That could be the source of my troubles. Because I wouldn't have expected the saw to make the kind of mistakes, as I would describe it, that I was seeing there. So let me just see what this thing here is doing when I tighten it. Okay, so that there is moving a small, I don't know what you call it, here is a proper name I'm sure, that's closing up on the rail, and that does the same. I guess what I need to do is close it up but not too much. I have seen demonstrations of saws like this where they quite successfully cut through their full depth of cut, and that's what I want to do. So I'm just tightening those two, should we call them cams? Yeah, why not? Tighten those cams up a little to the point where this thing moves and it's not rattling on the track now. Okay. You can tell that I didn't learn these things by watching someone else's review, so you can be assured this is my own authentic review. Right, well, according to the spec sheet, this should cut a maximum depth of 56. And that appears to be what I am set to, 56. But I know that this slab is only 52 millimeters thick, and it hasn't quite cut all the way through. That's quite a difference. So let me just try this again, because I'm sure most of the things that are going wrong are just a matter of my knowledge and technique. But look, now I know for a fact that this slab is 52 mils thick, and that is just barely going beyond 52 mils. So I don't believe that's 56. In fact, I'll measure that. So I'm measuring the distance from the bottom edge of the rail, of the metal rail, to where the saw is, because that's the actual depth of cut. And I make that at about 53, 54, so that's not 56. I'm just going to bear with me right now while I borrow the phone that I'm using for a camera. I'm going to double check what the stated depth of cut is. Alright, I'm at the Makita New Zealand website, Yeah, maximum cutting capacity of 56 millimeters, and that's when it's at the 90 degrees. My experience just now is that that's not correct. It's slightly less than 56 millimeters. Because I knew for sure the depth of this. I must have been cutting it suboptimally when it didn't go all the way through, but I measured it just now. This is 52 millimeters, and this blade is cut into maybe a whisker over 53, 54, not 56. So, yeah, 56 is kind of aspirational. All right. Let's take a look at the cut. So I was doing a little bit of messing around there, but the final cut looks pretty good. So I could feel that I was doing a fair bit of work, and it has come out looking nice. That's a good, smooth, clean cut. I learned a bit about keeping the saw steady on the track by tightening up those cams, which was very useful because otherwise you get some blade deflection. And I also learned that the depth of cut is not quite what is stated in the documentation. And I checked that pretty closely. I measured it, and well, it's just not. But it was deep enough to go through this 52 millimeter slab by a couple of millimeters. So, armed with a bit of knowledge and now a tiny bit of experience, the second cut should go much more smoothly. What I may do actually is attach my vacuum to the saw because it does have the capacity for dust extraction. Okay, standard workshop vacuum plugs into that nicely, which is handy. That generally went better. There still was, maybe there still has been some blade deflection. Maybe it's just a matter of going slowly. I'm going to have to do that again. And it could just be a blade issue. Maybe if I tried this with a more expensive, more robust blade, we wouldn't have that problem. It could just be that this blade is, I don't know, something that's optimal for cutting panels like plywood. The dust extraction worked really well. Like you saw previously, there was dust all over here. Quite a lot was produced, but minimal this time. So happy with that. Now I'm getting deflection. Blade deflection and burning. So I guess the issue is just going to be to do this in passes. Wasn't really expecting that, I have to say, given the reputation of this saw, but again, it could all be down to the blade, maybe, don't know. Alright, so the final result, not bad. Number of factors probably going on. Laminate's hard work. Blade could be... I want to think Makita would have put a pretty nice blade on the saw, but you know, I want to give the machine some credit. It could be that a more expensive, more robust blade might have done a better job. So this thing did a fantastic job on the plywood panels, and it may be that they're kind of hoping that that's mostly what you're going to use the saw for, rather than cutting to its full depth, which is not even the full advertised depth. I've just popped back out to the workshop because I forgot to do this earlier, which is a bit silly. When you're doing 90-degree cuts, you want to make sure they are 90 degrees. Now, of course, those cuts where I tried to go full depth but the blade was deflecting, they won't be 90 degrees, but they're not here anymore. So when I did several passes, yeah, I can't see any space there. That's good, yeah, a very good 90-degree cut. Perfect in that regard. Interesting. Okay, so that's it's a mixed review because it kind of performs mostly when you're not doing heavy cutting like this, mostly performs very well. And, you know, some moments it performs well here, I guess when it's not going through a piece of wood that requires a lot of work, but some moments it's just not. I thought the blade deflection was entirely because I wasn't using the cams to lock this thing onto the tracks, and that was part of it. But even when I had done that, it still gave me some issues. So be aware of that. And it could also be that any other of the high-end rail saws would do the same. I don't know. Yep, but it's a fact. You saw it yourself. So, should you buy the saw? Look, I don't know. I'm just showing you what happened when I bought it. I'm glad I did, and all of this, I guess, is an education for me about how I should use it and what purposes it's good for. If I were to do a cut like this with it again, I would just know that it's wise to do it in passes of, say, 20, 30 mils at a time. I don't know how much is too much. I'm aware now that blade deflection is a real possibility. Good features though. Locks onto the track, that was handy. It's got the ability to go 1 degree more on the bevel. I haven't done any bevel cuts. Dust extraction works very well. It's got the score feature. I mean, it kind of does everything. Well, I was going to say it kind of does everything it says on the box, but it doesn't quite. It doesn't cut as deep as it says on the box, and you do get that deflection. See, now that one issue is going to dominate my thinking about the saw, which is not fair, because if I had not tried a deep cut like this, if I just, tried this out for a couple of weeks cutting panels, I would have come away saying it performs perfectly. And if you do nothing but cut panels or pieces that aren't that thick, I think it will perform perfectly. Just be aware of the limits of what you're using, I suppose. There we are, my thoughts. I have nothing to compare it to because I've never used a rail saw before, and now that I've got one, I'm probably not going to buy another one. But for what it's worth, that's how it went for me.